Welcome.
We ain't afraid of no ghosts.
This is your number one podcast for ghoulies and ghosties and long-legged beasties. Bringing you everything you need to know about things that go bump in the night and interviewing the personalities behind them. Make sure your doors and windows are locked. Now, here are your hosts, your ghost hosts, Scott and Julie.
Hello, everyone, and happy 2023, and welcome to the first show of the new year. I'm so glad to have you with us today. Hi, Julie. How are you? Happy New Year to you as well.
Happy New Year, Scott. Happy New Year to everyone. Hope everyone's had a safe and wonderful new year. And here we are again.
Absolutely.
And super excited to talk to Dacre tonight. It's going to be a lot of fun.
It is going to be a lot of fun. We started this show, Julie, in April of last year. So we're coming up on almost a year, and we have some fantastic guests planned throughout the rest of, or actually halfway through the year. I mean, we're booked out into June already with some pretty exciting guests.
Are we having birthday cake in April, Scott?
Say it again.
Are we having birthday cake in April, Scott?
We might have to have a party on it.
I think one is necessary. Absolutely.
We might. I mean, anytime to have cake is a good thing. So I wanted to, Julie, tell you, I don't think I've had a chance to chat with you. Liam Galvin is a psychic medium. He lives outside of Boston, but he has studied at Arthur Finley, as have I. He's also does coaching for mediums, and he's going to be on our show next week. He does private readings, but he's also does a lot of coaching for mediums as well. He has generously offered to give away a free, private, 30-minute reading with himself next week. His website is Liam Galvin, LiamGalvin.com. And how people can win that is, if they go to the Paranormal Project Radio Show Facebook page, they'll see that post where you can enter the giveaway. Just like it, like the post, and comment why you'd like to win the reading. And then if you want a second chance to win, you can share the post and like the page itself. And we're going to be pulling that next week when Liam's on the show. So I just want to let people know, just go on our Facebook page, the Paranormal Project Radio Show, like the post, and let us know why you'd like a reading with Liam Galvin next week. And you'll be entered to win, and we're gonna pull it next week during the show.
Oh, that is so exciting. You know, Scott, we're so lucky that we have so many nice people that come on our show and are willing to do these things for the people that listen.
No, it truly, truly is. I mean, we've been blessed. I mean, we've been blessed, and you and I have talked about this many, many times. You know,
absolutely.
We started this thing thinking, well, who's going to come on? Is it just going to be you and I having a chat here? But
that's exactly what we thought. And Anton, hi, Anton Ritter.
Hello, Anton. How are you?
Yeah. Hopefully, Anton, you heard how that you can win a free reading.
Free reading, yeah. So I want to say too, you know, one of those guests is with us tonight. We have had the luck of having, we've got the ordinary. When I say ordinary, just people who are doing such good work. They're here. They're in the paranormal. They're mediums, whatever. But then we have the people who kind of like raise the bar just a little bit. We have one of these gentlemen with us tonight. We were in Michigan for the paranormal convention in Michigan, and I was lucky enough to meet this gentleman. His name is Dacre Stoker. And if the last name sounds familiar, it is because he is the great-grand-nephew of the Bram Stoker, who wrote the books on Dracula. And he's with us tonight, and we are going to have such an interesting conversation. So I'd like to welcome Dacre to the show. How are you? Good to see you again.
Thank you, Scott and Julie, for having me.
Hi, Dacre. Great really to see you.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you guys. It's really great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Happy New Year to you as well.
Yeah.
You know, we were talking a little bit before the show, you know, about what you did before this, because you were a trainer. You've done some trained people for the Olympics and that kind of thing. How did you make the transition? I mean, obviously you have the name, right? But what brought all of that about, you know, where you wrote the first book?
Well, it's a tremendously long story, but I was trained as a teacher and a coach in sport, and I participated myself in the sport of modern pentathlon. I made the Olympic team in 1980 for Canada, but of course that was the year of the boycott because the games were held in Moscow. I then transitioned into becoming a teacher, and I just couldn't train myself to be good enough, so I decided to become a coach, and I was able to take the men's team for Canada to the Olympics in Seoul in 1988. So that was really a big part of my life. But nagging in the back of my mind for a long time was just the whole idea of the genealogy of the family and where we all sort of came from. And I started digging around because I have one of my dad's brothers, my Uncle Patrick, was very proud of our legacy coming from Ireland. And he collected all the papers. He was sort of the guy, that one guy that everybody has in the family that is the keeper of everything. And he said, Dacre, your wife is interested in genealogy. It's now time to share this info with you. So I was living in South Carolina with my wife. Come up to Montreal. I've got to show you all this stuff. So again, long story short, I brought my computer, my scanner. It was like hitting the gold mine. All these really interesting letters from not only George Stoker, who was Bram Stoker's youngest brother, my great-grandfather, but the other brothers and sisters as well. And the reason that all flowed to my Uncle Patty is that of the 7 children in Bram Stoker's family, only 3 had offspring, and 2 had offspring that had anyone alive today. So it's everything sort of tilted, to the youngest brother, and somehow it ended up in Montreal. All this really cool information about who they were, what they did professionally, what their interests were. And then, of course, once I sort of got my direct line figured out, it was like, well, Bram Stoker I've known about, and I knew that he was famous for writing Dracula. And I had some interest myself in university, wrote a paper on him, but didn't really get into him till sort of later in life, and decided, now it's time to do something with it. Now that I found where his notes are, where his typescript is, all these different museums and archives around the world, it's time for a Stoker family member to get involved.
That's great. And now, did you know that you were related? I mean, obviously you had the name, right? But did you know before the genealogy that you were related?
Well, yeah. I mean, the standard story, which is really true, and it's a good one, Scott, is that at 12 years old in Montreal, people used to come to the household for Halloween, and they'd sort of joke, oh, the Stokers, what are you going to do to us? Are you going to give us candy or take some blood? And I said, Dad, what the heck is going on here?
Right.
And he sort of said, son, it's now time to tell you. So he brought me to our library, and I'm not kidding. He pulled out of the shelf a first edition Dracula. Wow. When he opened it up, it was signed by Bram to his mother 3 days before Dracula was published. So it was an early edition that Bram had a couple of them, signed one to his mom. His mom then gave it to one of Bram's other brothers, who took it to British Columbia when he moved. So his name was in there with the address. And then when he died, his wife inherited it. She signed it. And then somehow it ended up in our possession in Canada. So that book is now passed on down to me. And I sort of take, the caring of this book very seriously. I loan it to museums and libraries around the world when there's exhibits. But obviously that's how the whole ball started rolling about, who is this guy? I started reading biographies about him so I could understand more about, my family and the legacy that Bram sort of left to the world.
Wow. So did you feel like you needed to prepare yourself? How did you prepare yourself to follow in those footsteps and write books on Dracula? Was that difficult?
Well, yes. First of all, I wasn't an English major. I wasn't a writer. I was a coach. I was an athlete. I was trained to be a teacher in sport and science. So writing didn't come natural. But when I figured out co-authors can help and editors can help. So the very first one, Ian Holt asked me, he said, look, let's write a book together. I've got a screenplay that's never gone anywhere. I've got some ideas of continuing, essentially. Many of your listeners probably saw the 1992 Francis Ford Coppola film, Bram Stoker's Dracula. He said, I'd like to continue that story, but in the vein of Bram Stoker's novel being continued. Would you be interested to learn what you can about your great-granduncle, find lots of things that he didn't put in his novel, and let's continue the story 25 years after the novel Dracula ended. So it wasn't hard to find out by looking on the internet where where things are located. The Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia have Bram's notes for Dracula, 125 pages. That, again, was another gold mine, Scott. It was like finding all of the research notes, the books that he used for his research, and most importantly, for our case, for the book Dracula the Un-Dead, characters that didn't make it into Dracula that are now, available to us to use, plot ideas. So that was the mother lode. And then other things started to flow. Bram Stoker actually still has 2 great-grandsons still alive. And I contacted my cousins and said, hey, have you got any other cool things?
Yeah.
Well, I found a journal of Bram's in their attic in the Isle of Wight. And that was like this treasure trove of stuff that Bram Stoker kept in his own personal journal, ideas, thoughts, things that went into stories, things that went into speeches, just observations from the period of time when he was in university through when he started his working for 11 years, this thing spanned, while he started working for Henry Irving, the famous actor, as Bram was his manager of the theater. So I figured out how Bram was wired. I sort of get that as a teacher and a coach, but now I've got the information in my hand about a guy who died in 1912 and I'm related to him. I can really get some insight into him. So that helped me characterize Bram Stoker in a novel.
It's fascinating. And then you did a prequel.
Yeah. Now, I kind of started backwards, like Star Wars,
Yes.
I started with the sequel, and then I found so many interesting things that this needs to be told. I mean, it's one of these things where you as you're going through, oh, no, that's not going to fit in this book. I'm going to put it here. So you create this folder of things.
Right.
And the one thing that really got my attention is sort of combining my sporting background with Bram's life and using it in my new career as a writer. Bram Stoker, for the first 7 years of his life, was a very sick child. They did not know what the illness was, but he was, as he says himself in the one book that he wrote about his boss, Henry Irving, he said, I never knew what it was like to stand upright for the first 7 years of my life. I had plenty of time to think about things. And as I dug into this, I realized that he was most likely bloodlet and that he had some kind of miraculous recovery at 7 years old. 10 years after he recovered at the age of 7, he was a champion athlete at Trinity College in a wide variety of sports, from rowing to weightlifting to gymnastics, rugby. So he had this recovery. Like in my life, it's like, oh, is the guy taking steroids? Is he blood doping? What is he doing illegally, like all these Olympic guys are doing?
Right.
So I said, no, I can use this. Obviously, I could use this and interject a little supernatural flair.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, Julie, it's like this was again, I use this term too much. It was like gold for a writer.
It was handed to you on a silver platter. Absolutely. Yes.
It was handed. There's no question. So I put this story outline together of Bram Stoker writing Dracula after he has reason to believe the supernatural creatures are real. And he grew up in Ireland with lots of folklore of Irish mythology and so on. And he had a very interesting but strange nanny. He really did. And I found a co-author, a guy that can write this style at the Horror Writers Association annual meeting. His name's J.D. Barker. And I pitched him my idea and he said, oh my God, that is great. I said, I think we should do this together. I was not a strong enough writer to do this by myself, but I can create the outline, I can create the text, but he wove it together just magically. And the book was a huge success. It's become an international bestseller. And we were one of the top 5 horror books in the US, the #1 horror book in England. So people still love Dracula. And I keep finding interesting little niches to satisfy that appetite as I dig deeper into the family and Bram Stoker's life and what he used for his research processes.
And Bram Stoker never lived in Romania or Transylvania, right? He was what, Ireland, Scotland? I mean, that way, or?
Yeah, he did travel as far as Germany and Italy, but he never went to Transylvania. But I'll tell you this, Scott, I have now found that he has done tremendous research in the London Library. And now I know all the books because I've purchased copies of the same editions of the books that he used for his research. And, back in those days, this is, he started writing this book in 1890 and he finished it and published in 1897. This was the Victorian era where England was at its height of power and people were interested in traveling and learning about the world, great adventurers. And they would write books about it and come back and publish them in England and they'd sell around the world. There was 5 really, really detailed books that told Bram, and I could see how it did, details not just about Transylvania and what it looked like and the customs and the people and the physical geography and so on, but the superstitions as well. So he never went to this wonderful country, but he benefited from other people going there and writing about it. And that's why we feel to this day that Bram must have gone because he got it right. Well, he got it right because so many other people went there to write about it.
Is Bram the reason, or is he the source of what we think about when we think of Dracula sleeping in the coffin and the Bela Lugosi type character? I mean, that's not him, right?
Well, in a way, no, that's a great question because in a way it is. And here again is the sort of the shorter version of it. He looked at books in different places, Whitby Library and London Library, and found Vlad Dracula the Impaler, historical character, the real Prince Dracula, and found a lot about him. And he merged him with vampires that were actually out there in the world as far as, well, you guys know the New England vampire scare of the late 1800s, tuberculosis.
Right.
People believe that in New England. They believe that in Eastern Europe. Bram found 13 countries that I've noticed in his notes and articles about it that had vampire in their lore. So he merged real ideas that people had. He had an article about the New England vampire scare in his notes and Vlad the Impaler. So he put that together, packaged it, right, as any theater manager would, and wrote about it in a way that made the story real. But when he died in 1912, his wife had the rights to the story. And in over 10-year period, she eventually got around to having it turned into a stage play. And that's where Bela Lugosi appeared. That's where Raymond Huntley appeared. That's where the Dracula, the Eastern European suave-looking guy, the sexy kind of guy, that's where he appeared. It's not Bram's revenant from the grave, the gnarly old guy. That wouldn't have made a hit on the stage in London. But the more physically attractive guy. And then, of course, Lugosi gets into the Universal film in 1931, and we say the rest is history. You got Christopher Lee and all the others, Jack Palance,
right? Yes,
everybody. They humanize Bram's Dracula. They now he looks like some runway model. All the females around him.
Oh my God!
So in a way, yeah. But and that's all good stuff. But it just is. He started the trend, but it's morphed to become modernized, newer, more attractive. But it all goes back to those original roots. That book that he wrote started the whole thing.
You mentioned something about Bram and the supernatural. And of course, that's kind of what we talk about on this show. We do talk about Dracula and all this stuff. But can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. To put this in perspective, and you guys know this probably even better than I do, when you look at the time period when Bram was writing, 1890, there was, I wouldn't say revolt, but there was people beginning to question organized religion as we know it. Okay. Mm-hmm. It was always, this is God's way, and the priests were really strict, and everybody did exactly what they're told, stayed in their lane. But with scientific advancement at the end of the 1900s, people were beginning to think more out of the box. They weren't just relying upon God's will for answers about mysteries in the world. They were beginning to use the scientific process. Charles Darwin had written The Origin of the Species in 1859. He was that was groundbreaking stuff that rocked the religious world and scientific world a little bit on their behind. And Bram was very attuned to that. People were getting interested in the occult, into seance, into tarot cards. They were really thinking all these things. So it was a time when people would take risks to have to be open-minded thinkers. They were going into secret societies, Freemasonry, Order of the Golden Dawn, the Hellfire Club in England and Scotland were places where people would go and discuss these things. And it was unsafe because there's still a conservative society. But Bram was really caught up in all this. He was a Freemason, as was Henry Irving, his boss. He was around many creative and intelligent people who were thinking about these things. And so part of Dracula, and people have taken, made careers really out of analyzing Dracula to get their PhD, their master's thesis, to write books about it. They've looked at hidden messages. What was Bram doing? What was he thinking about? And I'll tell you this, there's a big occult element in Dracula because Bram was thinking about the devil, and not as devil worshippers, but people just thinking about the power of the devil versus
the power of evil itself.
Good
and bad, the eternal struggle between good and bad.
Yes. All of that was top of people's minds. Right. And so he slid all that kind of stuff into the novel. So I'm convinced, and this is long-winded, but you guys are getting this, that Bram was not able to freely speak of all these things because he was a very conservative and upstanding manager of the most famous theater of the time, the most famous actor of the time. He couldn't be looked at as some wild thinking whack job. Otherwise, it would not be popular. So he would veil these things into his stories. So as I look into his journal, I look into messages in these books, and I recently found an article in a newspaper in Scotland. You see, Bram spent 14 summer holidays in a place called Cruden Bay, Scotland, north of Aberdeen. And it's a really interesting little town. I've now been there a couple times. I lead tours up there. But there is very interesting pagan rituals to this day that people do, but there's also heavily influenced by both Protestant and Catholic religion. So it's got there's firm grip on people as they were when Bram was there by strict religion, but people were also free, especially the fishermen, to do these pagan rituals when they left the land and went out to, the ocean, Mother Earth. They were in Mother Earth's hands, so they did all these kind of rituals and sacrifice and all that cool stuff. Bram wrote about second sight and this whole idea that certain people in certain parts of the world had this gift of being able to open their mind and see things that other people couldn't. And he found this to be a trait of people in Highlands of Scotland, that there was recordings of folks that were seeing premonitions, you'd call them. But second sight is what they did in those days. And I found this article from this guy, Norval Scrimmanger, who believed in these things himself. And he said 30 years ago, so this was something he wrote he experienced in 1904, but it came out in 1934. He said, 30 years ago, I had the honor of meeting Bram Stoker at a party. And I was there to interview Henry Irving, but I found Bram Stoker much more interesting, which is a little naughty, but that's not Bram's fault that he's more interesting. And they had a conversation, these two, that Norval wrote about. And he said, Bram Stoker held everybody in the palm of his hand as he recounted these stories on his experience with second sight. And it was told in the way that Bram wasn't just saying, oh, this is silly, it's more of, I believe this happened. Isn't this interesting? It happened here. And the first story was that him and his wife met some people in the town of Aberdeen, and the lady mentioned she had an experience where the daughter, who was 4 years old, said something about the baby that was in the mother's arms. Oh, she never plays with me. She's dead. And the mother said, no, she's just fine. She's right here. What are you talking about? No, she's not right. A 4-year-old daughter. The next day, totally unannounced, the baby died. And this was Bram recounting, like, maybe this daughter has, has second sight. Maybe the kid does. And Bram was speaking this as matter of factly. The second one was just as personal, that Bram went shooting, pheasant shooting, with the local earl in Scotland.
As one normally does.
Of course. Well, Bram was a big celebrity, right? He was invited to go, and the earl would bring sort of the hoity-toities who were there in town. We must go shooting. And they assigned you a ghillie, they'd call them, who would load the shotgun for you and hand it to you so you could pull the trigger, and he'd give you another one. And Bram said to his ghillie, he said, oh, how is the Lord? And he goes, oh, he's not well. He goes, but he looks fine to me. He knows the sheet is getting high. The sheet, obviously, the cover you pull over someone when they die, right?
Yes.
And he goes, oh, don't be silly. Nothing happened. Came back the next year. He was invited again to go shooting with the same guy, and he requested the same ghillie. He said, I want to have a chat with that young man. And he got the ghillie. He said, well, you're certainly wrong. The Lord is still here. He's just fine. He said, no, the sheet is much higher. 2 days later, the ghillie reported to Bram, who was staying at the local hotel, that the Lord had died of a brain aneurysm. So totally unexpected, undiagnosed, just boom like that. And this is Bram not making fun of this. It is him affirming that certain people have second sight. The one book that Bram reviewed, it was reviewed, and the book review was sent to New Zealand, if you can believe it, but it was about second sight in the Highlands of Scotland. And he gave it a very favorable review, as if this stuff really does happen. He said there's some crazy stories, but for the most part, these things really happen in certain areas. So that's long-winded, Scott, but it says that my great-granduncle really did have a sensitivity to this.
Sure.
He wrote about it in a way that it was the real deal and didn't sort of put it down.
Sounds like he was very open-minded, which I think, back in his day, people really weren't, because as you say, the church still had quite a hold on people, whichever, church you were, whichever Christian church you were affiliated with, Catholicism or any Christianity. You lived your life according to the church, and you would never think about stepping out of bounds. And to think that something like the gift of precognition could actually exist, because humans aren't supposed to be able to do that. So in order for him to think that way and to be brave enough just to step outside the box and say, this is what I've seen and this is what I believe.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely
amazing.
right.
You're right.
To express free thought was a big deal.
Well, and it still is. I mean, really, I'll tell you just briefly, I do mediumship work, and someone that I know that lives in Brazil, now they're, South America, wrote to me and said, how did you get involved with this? Like, how did it happen? And I said, I explained just briefly that, things that led up to it. And he said, well, aren't you Catholic? Yeah. So, but I mean, that's how a lot of people feel, is that it's
even today, it's so true. Even today, it's,
this is 2023.
Yeah, it honestly is. I actually, on the door to my condo, when I took down my Christmas wreath, I put up my triptych, and it's the Celtic the three phases of the divine female. And someone walked by and said, "Oh, she has a curse on her door." And I opened my door and I said, absolutely not. It is most certainly not a curse. And I went out, and of course I had to take my soapbox out and explain to them exactly what it meant, but
Oh.
yeah.
But can you imagine it back in his time?
I'd be burnt at the stake at that,
Oh.
at this point. That's it. They'd be out my door.
No,
Yes.
you're right. And there's a quote in Dracula that I'm going to tell you guys. And every time I see it, I use it in one of my presentations around the world. It makes me think that Bram is sitting right here. And it's his message, and people say, Dacre, what do you think about Dracula? Can you sum it up? And I go, geez, come on. How do you sum up this novel? But here's my best attempt at it. And it goes to, Julie, what you said about keeping an open mind about things, which is spread throughout the whole novel. By the way, Van Helsing, who is the guy that understands modern science, but he also understands the old science and the old ways. He's the guy that mixes traditions and superstitions with new science, and he's trying like heck to convince Dr. Seward, who is a fairly narrow-minded example of a scientist of the day that needs definitive proof of things, which is okay, but he's having a hard time believing in things that he can't prove. So there's two quotes. The first one is, there are mysteries which men can only guess at, which age by age they may solve only in part. And that is so Bram. It's like, we may not be able to prove a vampire exists right now. And that's when Van Helsing said that, when he's trying to explain to the band of heroes who all come from different walks of life. The Lord Godalming, the newspaper guy, the lawyer, and these ladies. It's like, there are mysteries which men can guess at, which age by age they may solve only in part. Doesn't mean we don't deal with it. He said, look, just because we can't prove a vampire exists, we see this guy going around. Lucy is losing all this blood. What more proof do you need? We can't prove it right now, but by God, we've got to stop it. Right. So that is so Bram. And the other one, it comes from Mark Twain, and that is, faith is believing what you know ain't so. And that is from Puddinghead Wilson, but it's also interjected into Dracula. And Bram and Mark Twain were very close friends. They were neighbors, and I believe both of them had many a conversation about things they both believed in, which is spiritualism and understanding.
Would you love to be in that room?
Wouldn't that be cool? Yeah,
I'm telling you, absolutely.
No, they're very close. And by taking that, I once knew an American who so defined faith as believing in things you know are not true. Believing in things you know are not true. I'm open-minded. I'll believe in things that I can't prove by present science. I mean, that's the paranormal jumping at you right now. Look, if we're open-minded enough, some people have the sensory ability, some people don't. Some animals do, some don't. And let's be open-minded to say maybe things do exist. And that is pure and simple what Bram Stoker is talking about in Dracula throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I spent the last 30 years working at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And I have to say that you would think that scientists would be so close-minded about my paranormal exploits, but I had my graduate students were absolutely fascinated by it. These were scientists that were working on PhDs. These were honestly rocket scientists. It was the engineering systems lab, worked on the Mars projects. These people were absolutely brilliant and true scientists, but they were so open-minded to any possibility that when they knew that I had something going on over the weekend, an investigation or a walkabout, the first thing they wanted to hear on Monday morning was any evidence, what happened. They were just fascinated by it. So the two can and should go hand in hand.
Well, they need to go hand in hand and to be successful. And the other hand, if we can bring a third hand, is essentially faith and goodness. The collective spirit of people together in a positive direction, making good things happen. And that's the message of Dracula is. And it's funny, Scott, because, we talked about these notes and things that I found and what I used in Dracula the Un-Dead. Bram originally planned to have a detective, Inspector Cotford, in the novel.
Interesting.
And and he didn't. and I think the reason why, and again, you got to look back at the relevancy of the time period. The Metropolitan Police and Scotland Yard were just picking up momentum and popularity and effectiveness, right?
Right.
They couldn't stop Jack the Ripper murders, which happened just before Bram Stoker started writing Dracula in 1890. So I think Bram was so attuned to the lack of confidence and abilities in the police because the Jack the Ripper murders went unsolved and all the people in London were scared to death. Stoker and Irving had to change the plays that they were putting on in the Lyceum Theater because people didn't need gruesome. They had enough of that in the real news.
Right.
So my point is Bram didn't use a policeman, but he did use the collective spirit and the power of a modern woman, Mina, to forge this relationship of this band of heroes, or the crew of light, as they're called, led by a man, Van Helsing, who understands the need for science and technology. You know, there's a lot of high tech at the time in Dracula, but also understanding, you know, traditions and superstitions. That's his message. And it's the same, I'm sure, as yours in the MIT lab. You know, you still have to have positive, good people working together with good intentions.
Absolutely. Yes. And willing to be open-minded and listen.
Yeah.
And that's it. People don't, in this world today, we don't have good listeners. I think we need to all go back to kindergarten and put your listening ears on.
Right.
No, that's true. But most people are waiting for a chance to speak rather than listening to what other people are saying.
True. Very true.
Dacre, you have a new book, right? What is the newest book that you have?
Yes. Again, kind of an interesting story, but for the past 2 years, I've been working on my version of an annotated Dracula, along with a Dracula scholar, Robert 18 Besang, who was one of the two people who deciphered the Dracula notes. But sadly, Robert passed away just a few weeks after we finished the annotated Dracula. Oh, wow. It was annotated for the 125th anniversary. So it came out just a couple of months ago. It's available on Amazon. But here's what's interesting and different about it than any of the other annotated Draculas. And there's some good ones out there, don't get me wrong. But both of us not only had an intimate knowledge of all the Dracula notes that sit in the Rosenbach Museum, because he transcribed them all. We also have access to the Lost Journal that Elizabeth Miller and I transcribed them all. I had access to the 1901 edition of Dracula that Bram Stoker had in his hands and was asked by his publisher to pencil out and cross out 30,000 words to create the first paperback edition of Dracula, the first abridged edition. And back in those days, the abridged editions, paperback editions were actually, you know, for the not so wealthy people. So maybe the not so well educated people. So what Robert and I did was we took all of those crossouts, all of those bridge words, all of those excerpts, turned them into grayscale and inserted them into the regular Dracula the way you'd normally read it. So as you're reading this book, you see certain passages of grayscale, which you can still read easily, but those were passages or words that Bram had taken out. So you don't miss it. You just see, oh, why would he have taken that out? Why is that out? Right. And then the other element that really sets this book apart is the Dracula typescript. Now, a typescript is a manuscript that is typed. So the manuscript Bram had, he did all his edits, he took it to a typist in London, typed up 500 pages or so, all set to go, hands to his publisher. His publisher sits down with him and does more edits. For some reason, he says this book is too long. Now, we know back in the day, paper was expensive. Books weren't usually much over 400 pages. That was a lot for those days. So he had Bram take out a lot. So I'm privy to seeing the typescript that the Paul Allen Estate in Seattle, Washington owns and see all these things that are crossed out. Now, the normal reader never sees these unless you get a chance, like me and 6 other researchers who got a chance to see what was taken out, because you just read Dracula the way it was published. But I know what the alternate ending was, because the ending was taken out. The first 2 chapters were taken out. So what I've done with Robert's incredible mind and his ability to put pieces of the puzzle together, and when the 2 of us did this, we've recreated the original book that Bram wrote with those pieces that were edited out. And you see the difference. You see, instead of having words crossed out, we simply underline them so the reader doesn't have to look through a crossout. But you get to see all these cool things that were taken out of the book. And we still don't know if, which ones Bram crossed out, which ones his editor did. I know Bram's writing, so I know which ones he put in words. But I also know that he had a brother who was a famous doctor, his eldest brother, Dr. William Thornley Stoker, who actually is a character in my prequel, Dracul. He was a medical expert. He was knighted for being the head of the Royal College of Surgeons of Ireland. He's the guy that helped Bram get all the medical things in Dracula correct. Right. The blood transfusions, the brain surgery on Renfield. Yeah. He was also an expert in people with mental health problems. Back in the day, they weren't so polite about saying mental health. They called them lunatics, and just dealt with them as criminals, essentially. Right. And so there was all the stuff that was his brother helped Bram get right, and even edits by his brother in this final typescript that we include in the story. So this is a real, it's a treasure trove of for Dracula fans and scholars to be looking over Bram's shoulder and say, what did you originally plan to do? There's 1,400 footnotes and all these things, deletions and additions, some things put back in at the last minute in Bram's handwriting. Really cool stuff. So that's the latest work, available on Amazon.
That's great. So Amazon, they can get that today if they want to go on.
Paperback and hardcover as well. Absolutely.
Amazing.
Do you know if Bram had written anything besides this? Are there other works that he's done that were apart from this?
Oh boy, yeah. 12 other novels.
Okay.
About 20 or so short stories. Some supernatural, some romance, some mystery. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, he's only known for Dracula and a little bit the Lair of the White Worm, and the reason he gets known for that, like everything else in this world, it was turned into a Ken Russell movie, and it had Hugh Grant and Catherine Uxenberg in it. Not a very good movie, and funnily enough, it's a strange book, but it was written as a favor to Bram's publisher. This is sad. Now get ready, guys. Bram suffered a stroke, lost the sight in one eye, and he knew he was on a downward trajectory the last couple of years of his life. Henry Irving had died. He didn't work for the Lyceum Theater anymore for the last 7 years of his life. But his publisher still wanted to squeeze out one more bestseller out of Bram, went to him and say, well, have you got one more in you? And Bram relied upon an old story of a worm in Celtic sort of mythology that's an all-powerful creature, from the center of the earth. And he wrote a story about it. And if you read it, if any of these listeners read it, it's a little disjointed, but Bram was really ill when he was writing it. It's not his best work. And I'm sad to say that he got taken advantage of by his publisher. And it is his second most famous work because it was turned into a movie by Ken Russell. But I think the second best book that he wrote was The Mystery of the Sea, which is a really cool adventure. Not a lot of supernatural, a little bit, but it takes place in Scotland where Bram actually wrote Dracula. And it's a sort of another real-time story in Scotland about an American lady who comes over to Scotland, and she's an heiress, but she has to get away from America because her life is in peril because she's an heiress, and they fall into some really weird things that happen. And Bram is really into ciphers and helps her escape by going through caves and all this cool stuff. The other one people may know about, Scott, is Dracula's Guest, which was one of the chapters taken out of Dracula's, and it was published as a short story by his wife after he died. So that's reinserted into Dracula. But if you want to read one of his better short stories, The Squaw, Dracula's Guest, The Judge's House, those are ones that I think are good. He also got into Egyptology and wrote The Jewel of Seven Stars, because back in those days people were really into Egypt.
Yeah.
And those are the days.
Huge in those days. People were buying. They were bringing back sarcophagus and displaying them in their living rooms.
Yeah.
It was just crazy.
Stealing them as well as buying them.
Stealing them.
Yeah, no,
well, someone was stealing them, and then they were purchasing them. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And mummy and everything entombed in the sarcophagus and displaying them in their living rooms. It was a crazy time.
It was. Bram was good friend with Oscar Wilde's family. And Dr. William Wilde was one of these guys that went there and did bring back a little mummy. So, Julie, you're absolutely right. And I'm sure that influenced him.
Yes.
His mother, Oscar's mother, Lady Jane Wilde, wrote a number of books about Irish mythology. And she was also a mentor to Bram in his writing, because his dad was not much of a mentor. He wanted Bram to stick with being a civil servant. So, right. It's funny how the Wilde family has sort of mentored Bram to become what he was.
So, speaking of Scotland, you take people on tours, right? You take people on tours to where? Where do you go?
Well, I've kind of broken them into two things. I mean, I call them literary adventure tours, and I'm working with a company called Experience-Transylvania. Good friends of mine. They're in Stockholm, Sweden, but there's also one of the sisters is in Transylvania. So we did this 125th anniversary tour last year to places that Bram wrote the book, was influenced to write the book, where he actually took his holidays and got interest in the town of Whitby in Yorkshire. So we go to York, we go to Edinburgh, where Bram actually he brought the Lyceum Theatre to perform there. He did some of his research there. Whitby, he set chapter 6, 7, and 8 there. And then farther up the coast in Cruden Bay, Scotland, is where he wrote the book. And we also found the town where Emily Gerard, a Scottish lady, who actually probably wrote the most influential book that Bram used to find Transylvanian superstitions. And she was a Scottish lady, but she was living in Transylvania when she wrote the book. So we go see her town. And so that's a literary adventure tour, all the cool places. Of course, I read the book out loud with people there. We sort of reenact things, not the biting, but the good stuff. And then
that would add a whole different spin to it. I think that's something you should consider for next, for other trips.
Well, Scott, I've been trying to figure out how to get the right insurance for people to be, bloodlet while they're there, and I haven't found one yet. But we do also go to Transylvania. Obviously, there's Bram never went there, but I have, and he methodically set the story by using a certain map in one of the books in the London Library, exactly as you can go there today, to the different towns of Oredo, Klausenberg, Bistritza. I even discovered, by cross-referencing the Dracula notes, the Paul Allen Dracula typescript, and the books in the London Library, I've discovered the location of Bram Stoker's fictional castle. It helped because he gave us map coordinates that are sitting on top of an extinct volcano in northeastern Transylvania. And the book that he actually saw Bran Castle in, which is in southern Transylvania, Bram saw the exterior of this castle. So he merged two castles together, one in Scotland and one in Transylvania, and moved it onto a volcano. Why? Because volcanoes were the portals to hell. That's where the devil lives. So it's I put pieces together, Scott, and that's why I bring people there, and we get to really experience, what Bram felt, what he read, and what made him write the book.
So we have about 5 minutes left. I mean, it's like the quickest hour. It's just sort of breeze through. So I'd like to give you a few minutes if you want to tell people how they can maybe find you for your tours, how they can learn about where you are, your appearances, your website, all of that kind of thing.
Well, thank you. It's always nice. So BramStokerEstate.com. My wife and I manage that for the estate, Bram's great-grandsons. And it's a treasure trove of info all about Bram Stoker, the family, research we share with people. Probably my best place, even though I haven't renewed it as much as I should, is DacreStoker.com. But I'm very active on Facebook, Dacre Stoker Author, and also on Instagram. That's where I post all about my tours, my trips, the latest books that come out. On the BramStokerEstate.com page, I sell all my books out of a little shop that we manage. We sign them and ship them from there.
Nice.
Even the Bram Stoker bobblehead you see over my shoulder, I had created. We sell those and other cool stuff. So yeah, check us out. I make these speaking tours all over the place. And if anyone's listening that wants me to come and speak, find a museum, find a library, find a university that wants to pay for the flight, I'll be there and give you all kinds of, this stuff that you heard tonight, plus more with images along the way.
Perfect. We talked, it's a 54-minute show from beginning to end, and I feel like I could have gone another, there's just so much to talk about. I really am just so thankful that you've come on the show with us today. I enjoyed meeting you in Michigan.
So glad we stopped at your table when we were in Michigan.
Well, I got to say thank you. You guys let me do all the talking. You guys teed it up just right, and I know you are interested in this kind of stuff. So thank you for giving me the opportunity, and letting me just ramble. Hopefully, it wasn't too much.
No, so not at all. It was absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
Yes.
So don't forget, we can put your information down in the subject line on YouTube. We are on the Paranormal Project radio show on YouTube as well. We'll put all your information in there, and people can check it out. Check out your tours.
Well,
Hopefully,
let's do one more thing. I got inspired by what you said at the top of the show. Let me send you one of these annotated Draculas. Whoops.
Oh,
over here.
Where is it? Yeah.
This one. Let me send you this. And then you guys can auction whatever you want to do. Give it away. See all the stuff.
Wow.
Okay, I'm going to ship it to you. So I got your mailing address, and then your listeners can have a chance to enjoy this as well.
Dacre, stick on the show after we close out, and I'll give you all our information.
Thank you so much.
So
and thank you for
everybody,
our listeners. Yes.
Thank you
we have the best guests, don't we, Scott?
We really do. Yes, this is going to excite some people. So we're going to share that information for you. Look on a post, and I'll tell you how you can win that book, courtesy of Dacre Stoker. Don't forget, next week, Liam Galman's going to be on the show, and we will be chatting with him, and he's raffling off a mediumship reading. So we got a lot of fun things going on. Stay tuned for that. Mr.
Check that out, Dacre. You could get a free reading.
I know.
You could.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, thank you so much for being here. Everybody, thank you for joining us on the first show of 2023. I can't believe here we are, 2023. It seems like we just did this last year, 2022.
I don't know. I'm like the picture of Durian Gray. I just look better. What can I say?
That's a good analogy there. Good for you.
I thought you'd like that. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it. And Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year, everyone. Happy New Year to you, Dacre. And thank you so much again for being here. Everyone, have a wonderful week. Enjoy. We will see you next week right here on the Paranormal Project. Good night,
Take care
everyone.
and be well, everyone.
You have been listening to The Paranormal Project with Scott Allen and Julie Finn. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. While you're there, leave us a rating and review so others can find out about the show. Stay haunted and go out there and explore the paranormal.